Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into something truly unique. Forget your typical haunted houses. This deep dive is about the Winchester Mystery House. Staircases leading to ceilings, doors that open to brick walls. It's a puzzle of a place.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating is that it's not about trying to scare you. It's about trying to understand what would lead someone to build something so, well, unusual.
And that someone is Sarah Winchester. Before the mansion, there was a woman with a life full of both, well, privilege and some really deep sorrow.
Definitely a complex story.
She was born into a well-off family and married William Winchester, the heir to the Winchester rifle fortune. But then, tragedy hit. She lost her baby daughter, and a few years later, her husband died too.
Imagine that kind of loss, inheriting a fortune, but also that kind of grief. And this is where the Victorian era becomes really important, especially in understanding Sarah.
Okay, so we're talking late 19th century. You've got a ton of information on this. What's the Victorian connection?
Well, back then, spiritualism, the idea that you can communicate with the dead, it wasn't some strange fringe thing. It was pretty mainstream. Seances, mediums, people really believed in this stuff, trying to make sense of death, connect with loved ones.
So Sarah, deep in her own grief, she turns to this popular belief system, hoping for some kind of comfort or even answers. And that's where the whole Winchester curse story comes in, right?
Exactly. The story goes that a medium told Sarah she was cursed by the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles, and that she had to constantly build, to keep them at bay.
Okay, so is that it? Just a terrified woman following orders to avoid angry ghosts? Or is there something more to it?
It's a good question. But here's something else to think about. Think about Victorian mourning rituals. They were elaborate, almost theatrical. Widows wearing black for years, huge tombs. Grief was meant to be on display, almost architectural in a way.
Wow, that's a really interesting way to look at it. So this house, this massive, constantly changing project, maybe it was her way of dealing with that grief, almost like she was trying to build her way out of sorrow, one room at a time.
It's a really compelling theory, especially when you actually get into the details of the house, the sheer size, the bizarre choices she made in the design. It gets even more interesting.
So we're talking 160 rooms, 40 bedrooms, 13 bathrooms, 2 ballrooms. And get this, 38 years of construction, no blueprints, no master plan, just Sarah directing workers on a whim. One day it's a wall, the next it's a doorway. It's like she was trying to outrun her own mind or something.
That lack of a master plan, that's really what makes the Winchester Mystery House so different. Most houses are built on logic, function. This one, not so much.
So if we think about the house as a reflection of her inner world, suddenly all those strange choices make more sense. Not about logic, but about the imprint of her grief, her anxieties.
Exactly. You start to see the house not as just wood and nails, but as a physical form of her emotional state. Always shifting, changing, never settling down.
I heard a story once about a celebrity who painted every room in their mansion a different color. That struck me as a bit much, but this is a whole other level. Sarah wasn't just changing paint, she was changing the house itself. Every day, year after year. Almost like she was chasing something or something was chasing her. Okay, but what did that actually look like? We're talking staircases to nowhere. What did she actually build?
Okay, so picture this. You're walking up this grand staircase, right?
Yeah.
Expecting to reach another floor, but boom, you hit a wall. Some of them even lead straight to the ceiling.
It's like a dead end, but in a house.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And then you've got the doors. You open a door expecting a room, and it's just brick, a solid wall.
Wait, not even a closet or anything, just a wall.
It's just a wall.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this house so fascinating. It's like she was messing with the idea of what a house is supposed to be.
Yeah, like she took open concept to a whole other level. Haha.
Totally. But it's not just random, right? These weird design choices, they weren't just Sarah Winchester. They actually foreshadowed stuff that became popular in modern art and architecture way later, playing with your expectations, making you feel disoriented, using space to create a feeling.
So like those tilted rooms you sometimes see in museums.
Yeah.
Or those weird mirrors at carnivals. You're saying she was doing that kind of stuff back then.
Yeah, exactly. It's like she understood intuitively how to use space and perception to create this unsettling feeling, and she did it in her own home.
I remember one of the articles mentioned oddly shaped windows, like trapezoids or something, that made the light all weird inside.
Oh, yeah. It's those little details that really start to tell you about what was going on in her head. Imagine living in a house where the light's always changing, walls appear and disappear, staircases go nowhere. It'd be like living in a dream that never ends.
Or a nightmare, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because these choices, as weird as they seem, They make a different kind of sense if you think about them as, like, reflections of her grief, this constant search for peace. But she can't settle down because the world's taken so much from her.
Yeah, it's almost like she's taking that inner struggle and putting it out there into the walls and hallways. And what's crazy is that by doing that, by creating this world of shifting perspectives, she might have accidentally stumbled onto something really profound about grief itself, how disorienting it can be, how it doesn't follow any rules.
That's amazing. So we've got this sprawling house, constantly changing, full of dead ends and doors to nowhere. But what about the rooms themselves? The articles mentioned a few that sounded especially, well, interesting.
Definitely. Which one stood out to you?
Oh, the seance room. Multiple exits, one into the kitchen sink. What's that about?
Yeah, the seance room is really interesting. Remember how we talked about spiritualism being a big deal back then? This wasn't just for Sarah. Holding seances, it was practically a social event for the wealthy.
So, like, the Victorian version of a book club, but with ghosts. Uh-huh.
Exactly. But what's weird is those exits, especially the one to the kitchen sink, like it makes you think about how anxious, maybe even paranoid she must have been.
So even surrounded by all that money, trying to talk to spirits, she still felt unsafe. Like, even the house couldn't protect her from that feeling. What about some of the other rooms? What else did your research find?
Well, the grand ballroom really stands out. It's incredibly opulent, chandeliers, fancy floors, the works. But it's got this one detail that's just strange.
Okay, I love a good contradiction. Tell me more.
So it's got this amazing Tiffany window, right? But it's installed in a spot where the light can never actually hit it.
Wait, what? A beautiful, expensive window in a room that's always dark. Why even bother?
Right. It's fascinating, isn't it? And I think it says a lot about this weird clash in Sarah's life. She had all this money, but it couldn't bring back her loved ones, couldn't erase the pain. It was the Gilded Age. Everything looked shiny and new, but underneath, there was all this social unrest, anxiety.
So this ballroom, it's like a symbol of that whole era, this beautiful surface hiding all this inner turmoil.
Yeah, exactly. It's this reminder that even in a house as big and seemingly endless as the Winchester Mystery House, some things just can't be escaped no matter how many rooms you build.
We've talked about the seance room, the grand ballroom, but there was one more room, the witch's cap. What's the story there?
Oh, yeah, tucked away up in one of the towers. It's a spooky one, even for this house.
The articles mentioned weird sounds, something about the acoustics up there.
Yeah, people say they feel uneasy in there. More so than other parts of the house, even. Whispers, cold spots, that kind of thing.
And knowing Sarah's thing, for the mystical side of things, you kind of wonder if she meant to do that right.
It's definitely possible. The idea that a building can mess with your head, it's not new. Think about old cathedrals, the high ceilings, the echoes. They're designed to make you feel a certain way, to feel awe, something bigger than yourself.
So Sarah, into spiritualism and all that, maybe she was going for that same effect, but in her own home.
Exactly. Maybe to connect with spirits better, or even so, people visiting would be more open to suggestion. She saw architecture as more than just building stuff. It was about creating an experience.
Pretty ahead of her time when you think about it. But, okay, we've got to address the elephant in the room, or I guess the ghost in the mansion. All this talk of weird staircases and doors built on grief and spiritualism. It practically screams haunted, doesn't it?
You can't not talk about the ghost stories with this place.
Right. So what have people experienced? Give me those stooky details.
Oh, you name it. Footsteps when nobody's there, shadows out of the corner of your eye, sudden chills.
I even read about people seeing Sarah herself, still wandering around.
It's a popular one. But gotta put our skeptical hats on for a sec, right? Remember how we talked about disorientation, the power of suggestion?
This house is practically designed to mess with your senses.
Exactly. So you're walking around, it's dim, the air feels heavy, the house creaks and groans. Your mind starts filling in the blanks. We're hardwired for that, like seeing shapes in clouds.
So the house itself creates the ghost stories, even if there's nothing actually there.
It's a possibility. We crave explanations for the unknown, and if there isn't one, we make up a story that fits.
Makes sense. But ghosts aside, this place is still a mystery even now. Like this monument to unanswered questions and this woman's fascination with what lies beyond.
And that's what keeps people so interested, even today. It's not just a museum. It makes you think about grief, obsession, where the line is between being different and being, well, not quite right in the head.
And it reminds you that some things are meant to stay mysterious.
And speaking of mysteries, remember that recent discovery in the house?
The attic, right? Sealed up for decades.
They opened it up in 2016, like a time capsule, furniture, her stuff, even an organ perfectly preserved.
100 years after she died, and this house is still surprising us.
And that's what's so great about it. The past is still alive here. You can practically hear it whispering to you.
Well, this deep dive has been fascinating. I'm still thinking about those staircases to nowhere. It really makes you think about how we process grief.
Yeah.
You know?
It really does. And sometimes the best way to process those big emotions is to just let the mystery be. Thanks for chatting with me today.
My pleasure. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.